This is the Escape the Drift podcast, and I'm Dr. Jacob Egbert. Today's title is I Went to Burning Man and Why You Won't. So I've posted about this recently a little bit here and there in my social medias, and I want to talk about it in depth today. I want to share some of my experiences and thoughts around the premise of Burning Man, as well as sharing some of my unique experiences and talk about the reason or the why you won't go. So, first of all, let me start by saying this. I've wanted to go to Burning Man for at least 10 years, 10 years plus. You know, as soon as I had seen videos about it, I was intrigued, I was curious, I was drawn to the idea, the experience. And it became one of those someday I wish, I want to, not concrete things. And over the years, I continued to watch YouTube videos, and I would follow people who had gone and essentially lurked or creeped on their experiences from the outside. And there was something about it that occurred to me as perhaps devious, clearly a counterculture experience, counterculture event, and therefore there was an intrigue. I've always been drawn to that type of a behavior expression. So as I watch it, you know, I'd see the videos. I was just intrigued by the level of freedom that I perceived, and it kind of nods to when I was in high school. I remember being intrigued by Woodstock, and I would watch this documentary. It was like a 2-hour documentary that someone had put out. And, you know, the premise of Woodstock was it was almost a pop-up concert, a protest of sorts, and all of these world-renowned artists came in and played music. You had Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, et cetera, all these just top performers. And so for X amount of days in somewhere in New York, a number of people came in the freedom movement and had a party. And so I was intrigued by that. You know, there was naked people and, you know, whatever, the free love of the 60s, you know, early, I think it was like 69 maybe. And so this seeded my desires, you know, as a youth. And so Burning Man occurred to me as similar to the Woodstock experience in my limited, you know, just external observing. So anyway, I put that on the list of things to do. Like, I want to go to Burning Man. And I had heard stories from people, you know, in my close circles of their experiences with Burning Man. And they weren't always great. So, you know, people go there, they make radical decisions and they change their life in an instant, and the downstream consequences can be quite severe, you know, quitting jobs, leaving marriages, etc. It essentially is a transformative experience, and in all transformations, you see a new way, a new view of life that allows for different actions, and sometimes those actions have consequences. Whether that's good or bad, it's your determination, your judgment. So, Burning Man. A friend of mine, Nathan, Dr. Nathan Riley, who I've been friends with for about 10 years, he has gone a couple of times in the past, and, you know, I was intrigued by his experiences, and he'd tell me about it, and he would mention things about just the freedom of expression, the nudity, the different experiences that he observed or had himself. You know, he sends a picture of him and his friends covered in glitter, and just this kind of sensational, I guess you could say, presentation as an outsider just peek in at some of the highlights or the high points. And again, my intrigue just goes up. I've been around people that were all burners. You know, they'd been to Burning Man before, and they had this essentially a club feel to them as they're talking about it. It's like, you don't know, we know, you don't know, and you can't know until you know. And so there was this separation in those circles. And it's fine. There's nothing negative about that or wrong about it. But I definitely felt it. And I knew there was something powerful if it created such a separation, so to speak. So the intrigue, of course, continues to grow. Well, Nathan was on his way to Burning Man this year. And he drove all of his equipment, whatever he needed, his camping stuff, from Kentucky, where he lives, and was going to stop off here in Salt Lake City, visit me for a day or two, and then head down to Black Rock City, Nevada, where his wife and their 2 children were going to fly into in Reno, and he'd pick them up and drive them into the burn. So Friday, he's on his way in. Burning Man begins, I believe it was Sunday, so Friday, the weekend, prior to the weekend where it began. And as he's driving out, he's like, hey, and I'm like, yeah, I wish I could go. That sounds awesome. And he's like, I'm on these Facebook groups and people are trying to sell tickets. And so my initial reaction is like, oh yeah, that's, that'll never happen. Well, as it plays out, I had quit my job because I'm transitioning from one job to another job. So I don't have work. I was working on projects, but I didn't have any solid commitments or obligations. And so technically I could go. And I mentioned it to Amelia, my wife, and she immediately she says, why don't you go? And, so the gears start turning and I'm like, why don't I go? It's like a chance of a lifetime. And of course I want her to go with me. We've got a 2-year-old daughter and it's just a lot. We chose not to do that. And plus her grandpa was in the hospital in Washington. And so she really wanted to go up there and visit with him. And it just seemed to be a perfect turn of events for all of us. One, she gets to take Pepper up to see family, and I get to go to Burning Man for a week. Perfect. So I immediately get on the internet, start chatting with people, trying to find a ticket. And eventually I do. I find one on the internet. I buy the ticket. It's like $500 or $600. And I start packing my trailer. Like literally that day, it's just like, we got a lot of stuff to prepare. We, meaning me. I've got a lot of stuff to prepare and very little time to get this ready in order to be in a desert for 5 or 6 days, self-sufficient. So, of course, Nathan was there briefly for the weekend, and he gave me a bunch of tips, like, bring this, bring that. And I just started the preparation. So that's Friday night. I got my tickets Saturday arranged, or at least I hoped to, because there's a lot of like scammers, and it wasn't real clear. And then Monday, I had my live call with my meditation/mindset coaching group, where I get on and do a live call. And so I'm like, I have to do this call before I head out. And so as soon as it was over at like 1 p.m., I got in the car, drove the trailer, and headed to Nevada. So a lot of details. I don't want to belabor all the details of what this entailed, but essentially I got there. The next day, Tuesday, I got up. Nathan was there as well, and we drove into the desert, into Burning Man together, caravan essentially. So he's the one person that I knew in this city of 80,000 people, the pop-up city of Burning Man. And so I get there, I go through will call, I get my tickets, and I roll in and I have to find a campsite. So there are sections through this giant, if you want to get on the internet and look up or Google Burning Man, you'll see images and do aerial shots. You can see the layout. So essentially, I knew a general area, and I knew where Nathan was going to be because he was part of a camp, which was a designated area. So I had to find a free or open camp site. Find my site, roll in, get set up, and just go and explore. So I had to find a bike, in the weekend prior. I got a bike, I got all my gear, I got my food, I got my trailer. Anyway, I had everything that I needed to be self-sufficient. Nathan was there Tuesday, and, I rolled into his camp, said hi, like, I'm going to go explore. He's like, cool, see you tomorrow. Next day I roll into his camp, and he's like, we're leaving. Unfortunately, it just became too much of a strain on he and Stephanie, his wife, with their young children. And so they just are like, we've had a hell of a time getting here. The stress levels maybe were too high. Whatever it was, they chose to leave. So they left within about 24 hours of arriving. And so now I'm there alone with no contacts. I literally know 0 people in this entire place, which is fine. There's a lot of benefit to that. So here I am alone at Burning Man, the place that I've been dreaming of going for 10 plus years. And the experience is just unfolding in front of me. So I'm in the desert. It's 100 degrees outside. There are intermittent wind storms, we'll call them. Wind blows in and the dust just flies. It's essentially this wide open, vast, flat, old lake bed with a silty fine dust that blows in your face, whatever. So it's hot, it's dusty, and I'm roaming around this makeshift camp city with no contacts. I know nobody, so I'm essentially anonymous. And that played into a lot of the experiences that I ended up having. So before I get into that, I want to lay out a few things related to Burning Man. So Burning Man, I'm not going to get into the history of that. If you want to read about it, get on Google and do your research. This isn't the point of this podcast. But there are essentially 10 principles, and I want to read them. I wrote them down here so I can be accurate. And I want to highlight a couple of them. So the 10 principles that they operate under: radical inclusion, gifting, decommodification, radical self-reliance, radical self-expression, communal effort, civic responsibility, leaving no trace, participation, and immediacy. And if you want to get on their burningman.org website, you can read a lot of the details of each of these. But essentially what I wanted to focus on today was the things that really influenced my experience. And the few that stand out are: 1, radical inclusion. As someone, and I think this is almost nearly universal experience, one of our greatest fears in life is not belonging, or feeling like we don't belong. And it gives us a lot of, I guess you could say, suffering or discontent. And so going to a place where one of the core principles, number 1 principle, is radical inclusion. And that is all comers are welcome, how they are, no matter who they are. We just welcome everyone and we're all included. And so there was this built-in principle of inclusion. So immediately I felt that. I'm there. Anywhere I went, I talked to people, I felt included. As someone who was there alone and relatively lonely at times, that was beautiful. So it was there and it was active. Next, the thing that stuck out the most was decommodification. Now, decommodification, of course, means, or the intention is, and it was, I never saw anything that violated this at any level. And that is not a single thing to be sold. There was no expectation of exchange. And there were no logos, no advertising, no promotion of any of your brands or services or whatever you want to do. So the absence of that in the setting was immediately noticeable and a little bit, I wouldn't say disorienting, but just like, this is so odd, I have to like adjust to it. So for example, if ever you have gone to a fair or some other festival or any public gathering, there's always Pepsi, Nike, something credit union, sponsorship. And then there are people selling you things like, come and buy our hot dogs or a t-shirt, and then what is interesting is that becomes so normal in our current society that when you're experiencing the opposite of that, there is no barrier between people. As you're walking down the street at Burning Man, and there's a tent, and there's someone out there with a megaphone. They're like advertising, but here's where it gets different. They're like, come in and enjoy a drink. Come in and get some pizza. Or we've got hot dogs. And essentially what they're saying is, come in and enjoy this. This is our gift to you. There's no expectation. There's no exchange. It's simply we offer this as our gifting, which is one of the principles. Gifting without expectation of return. And this pervaded throughout the remaining experience that was just like striking. These art cars, these DJ booths, these every piece of art and expression there was simply for the benefit of others. The costumes people wear, it's like, I'm going to dress in the most elaborate, beautiful costume in order to elevate the experience of those around me, simply for the joy of expression. And so that barrier was gone. And when someone's saying, hey, come in and get some free pizza, you don't have that like, you're not going to get one over on me. I'm not going to pay that price. They simply want to give you some food. And so you're like, I'm hungry. Sure. Thank you. I'll come in. And then they give you food and they're like, I hope you'll like it. I'm here to give to you. And it was beautiful. So that, as I said, continued in multiple areas. Like I'm going out at night and there's a giant truck with a DJ on it and lights and everything, and people are just dancing and partying and celebrating. And you didn't pay to be there to that particular venue. Like you did pay initially just to get entry to the place, but it's a different feel. So anyhow, that celebration, I think the best analogy that I can use to like bring it into maybe your own experience would be family. When you go to a family reunion or you have people over at your house, you're like, hey, help yourself to the fridge. We got drinks in there, there's snacks on the counter. I just want to give to you. And that's how it felt everywhere the entire time. So that was beautiful. Other areas of intrigue for me. So kind of going back to that initial, like the things that were a little sensational, the nudity, the drug use, the wild expression of humanity in a more debauchery. I don't know what the word is, but that was there. I think I remember the first time I just went out from my first ride into after I got my camp set up, I went out and just like rode around in the public space. I saw this girl riding her bike completely naked, like bouncing along down the road. And at first I'm just like, this is a little bit shocking. And yet in the context of this location, it's like, okay, so we're doing that. And that's awesome. It felt free and it wasn't lewd. There was no nudity. And that is essentially the theme for the entire time. Like there was a lot of naked bodies and not once did I see anything lewd. There was not 1 ounce of inappropriate sexual expression or activity that I witnessed. And so, okay, that's what we're doing. That's the setting here. I knew it was here and I've seen it, I've experienced it, here we go. Now, that's a little sensational for the outside. So you having not been there, if you haven't, you may have a little bit of an ooh sensation, whatever you want to call that. And it's really challenging to express the experience of that without you having been there. And I'm not going to even go there. Like, you want to have that experience, you want to get it, you're going to have to go. So there's that. And that wasn't rare. Very, very few clothes were worn at this event. It was hot and you can be naked. Fine. So my first experience with this was in my neighborhood. There was a Finnish sauna set up. So it's 100 degrees outside and they still have a sauna. And so I see this and I love saunas. I have one and I've always enjoyed that experience. So I go and I'm like, all right, what is this? I look around and there's people in there like kind of in line and I'm like, I'm going to go. So I lock up my bike, I go in and we're in line and then it's like getting close to our turn. So you go into the center of this big circle room. There's not a roof on it and take off all your clothes. So now I'm standing in line with 16 naked people, completely normal, male and female, of course. And then the door opens, we go into the sauna, 8 on each side of the heater. And they start pouring water on the rocks and talking about Finnish sauna and the history. And it was just beautiful. We got to experience that all together, a bunch of strangers And when it was over, went out, they sprayed us down with like a mister, got dressed and went on our way. And I'm like, okay, I like this. I've experienced that before. I've been in public saunas where there was no clothing worn. So I've had that experience, and it's always awesome. So that was my first like public nudity at Burning Man experience. Cool. So carrying on, of course, meditation is a big part of my life and what I promote and what I'm trying to share with the world. Like, I've put in the time and effort to really become adept at the meditative practice for myself, but also teaching it to others. Fine. So this is a big part of who I am and what I do. And my camp was near the outside. So there's like a circle of people, and then on the outside is just desert. So I was right next to that. So I'd get up in the morning, I'd take my meditation cushion out into that just open desert space. And I'd put my cushion down. And I bring my notebook, of course, because I like to do a very intentional meditation. It's hot, the sun's just coming up, it's shining, and I'm like, I'm out here alone. I'm hot, I'm just gonna take everything off. So I'm naked. I'm sitting there naked meditating, and it's beautiful. And the barrier of nudity, public nudity, became really poignant to me in this meditation. And what I became present to in this was that oftentimes as humans, me using myself as an example, I am uncomfortable, I experience discomfort with what I perceive as another person's discomfort. Or I have, in a parallel, I have a fear of or a discomfort with the assumed judgment of the other person. So with the public nudity experience, I'm thinking, we have this perhaps shame about our bodies, or I have to be covered up for reasons. And what are those reasons? I'm afraid of judgment of my body. Like, someone's going to be like, oh, your body is not something. Or, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm shocked by the morality of this. Okay, certain settings, that's very appropriate. But whatever it is, there is a barrier between this, and it becomes sort of I guess you could say, a limiting factor or a constraint. You're restrained. And so in my meditation, I was thinking, this is a setting where it's completely accepted. And in certain settings, it's required, like for the sauna, like it was, essentially required. And so, but it was completely contextually acceptable and normal and appropriate. So I'm like, well, but it's also appropriate just down the street, because, 1 in 10 people are naked out here. So there's no barrier other than my own proposed barrier. So I thought, in the meditation, I am going to face this head on. There's a fear, there's a discomfort, there's something in me that doesn't want to do this, so I'm going to do it. So what I did in that moment is I got on my bike, did not put anything on, and I just rode straight into so I'm out in the middle of nowhere, essentially. I'm isolated, where it felt safe. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to go in. So I went straight in, rode down the street, past all the people that are milling about, like, hundreds of people. I just rode completely naked through the Burning Man streets. And what I discovered in this of myself was that the barrier that I held in what I perceived other people's opinions or feelings or thinking to be has held me back in so many areas of my life. And that experience to do that, to face a fear, not only literally being naked in front of people, that exposure, but metaphorically to really experience that my discomfort of another person's discomfort has limited me. And oftentimes that discomfort that I assume they have isn't there. And I got this because the other people that were naked rolling around the streets, I didn't have any judgment of them. I'm just like, cool, high five, like, go you. And the bodies, it's like, okay, your body's different, her body's different, his body's different. Awesome, whatever. I have no judgment of that. And so why do I assume that someone else does? And if they do, that's theirs. That's their judgment that they have to embody. If I have a judgment of someone, that doesn't feel good over here. If I have judgment of someone's expression, why? First of all, and if I do, that's mine. It's none of their business. And so I really took that on to like go out and just experience it at the most core level that I could imagine. And that is literally being naked in public. Like the biggest fear, like, oh, the nightmare of I'm in front of the school naked. Okay, well, just do that. And I don't mean do that in an inappropriate setting. I'm not encouraging this. If you're at Burning Man and you have that fear, like I say, go for it because it's amazing. But metaphorically, in other areas of life, if I express myself, if I want to be the raw version of me, the beauty of that experience when I do it and I let go of the perception of another, I just get to be me. And I get to have the enjoyment of that, the freedom of that, the freedom to express and to be. And that is where beautiful things happen, in my experience. So that fear was gone. I lost it. And I'll say this, I went out in the public setting a few other times, contextually appropriate, in that way. And I essentially dropped a lot of that like self-insecurity and whatever you want to call it, I guess essentially self-judgment, because really that's what it ends up being. Like if I was insecure about my body in any way, I'm projecting on someone else to have that same judgment of me. And so I just accepted, radical acceptance. So it was awesome. Okay, I really wanted to highlight that because it was such a beautiful experience for me. And what I want to get to now is essentially to nod to the topic here. We're almost a half an hour into this podcast, and I'm actually going to get to the second half of this, that being I went to Burning Man and why you won't. Why you won't is because of four things. One, you're afraid. And these build upon each other. You're afraid of the judgment of someone else. And the judgment of someone else provides or gives or creates discomfort. And then the fourth one, morality, perhaps. And morality, which can be seen as a good thing in some. I'm going to explain that here in a moment. You're afraid, you have a fear, feelings essentially. Fear is essentially a fear or a feeling of I'm not safe, I'm in danger. Something bad will happen to me. And that fear of the judgment that somebody will determine you to be not a part of them. You will be excluded. So you fear exclusion. The exclusion, the judgment that you're not part of the group, that you're not good enough to be a part of the group, has this visceral and deep component of safety. You will die if you're excluded from the group. Historically, that was literal. And now we have it as just this base innate DNA level fear. Because as humans, we, evolutionarily in the nature, we relied on each other deeply. That group of humans, Homo sapiens that roamed the savannas or wherever, relied on the group, to fight, to defend, to hunt, etc. A lone human was dead. That's just reality. So deeply in our bodies, we fear exclusion at a visceral, life-dependent level. Okay, so we fear the judgment of exclusion, and there's a discomfort that comes with all of this. I'm uncomfortable because of the judgment and that fear that's deeper for that. And then we get into morality. Now, morality is, again, in the world of judgment. I judge this person's actions or character to be right or wrong. And if it's wrong, you're out. And if it's right, you're part of us. So going back to the principles of Burning Man, number one was radical inclusion. However you come, whoever you are, however you are, you're accepted. If you're riding your bike naked down the street, you're accepted, come get a drink. We don't care. You're not violating anyone. And that's the key here. Nudity versus ludity. I'm not being lewd. I'm not attacking another. I'm not offending another. Anyway, just get that out of the way. So radical inclusion, being yourself, self-expressed. We fear the opposite of that. We fear the exclusion. And that is why you won't go. You're afraid of being excluded. You're afraid of violating the morals, the right and wrong of the group that you belong to. Because if someone in your group judges your character or your actions to be wrong, you're at risk of being excluded. So that entails a virtue, essentially. Morality and virtue are very close. Now, I personally, and I say this with some, there's a lot of qualification here. I have no morals. I choose to have no morals because in my perception of the world of reality, I do not believe in a right and wrong, because right and wrong is disempowering, first of all, where I ascribe myself in an operative form, like my operative, I guess you could say operating system, is essentially what works and what doesn't work. And that gives me ultimate freedom. And here's how. So freedom is essentially the condition of being free of restraints, especially the ability to act without control or interference of or by another or by circumstance. So if you're free to operate without constraint or restraint from external sources, another human or circumstance, you're free. That is freedom. Now, I don't want to be controlled by anybody. And this is one of the things that's like core to my human is don't tell me what to do. I don't want any external constraints, restraints. Now, in addition to the external ones, I don't want internal ones. I want to be completely free, free to be and free to act and free to do. And if there's a right and a wrong, to me, that's a restraint, and it's usually by an external source. So I have principles. I have guiding principles of who I am and how I operate. And that may be interpreted, I guess you could twist it and turn it into like a morality, but I don't think I don't want to constrain it that way. I don't want to speak it that way. But essentially, what I want to share here, what I want to say here is that freedom to choose my own actions, my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own way of being in the world has been the greatest gift I've given to myself. When I dropped the external morality of what is right and what is wrong based on some system that someone else created for me, I was free. Now, as you let go of that external judgment, that external right and wrong, that external you should be this way. You should not do that because I don't like it or I'm uncomfortable. When someone else is uncomfortable by you being you, and you listen to that, you have now put yourself under constraint. You're no longer free. You're a captive of their opinion. And there's the balance there. And this is the sticky part, is you want to be included. And are you willing to be a captive in order to be included? And this is why, and I'm going to come back to the Burning Man thing real quick. The radical inclusion and allowance, I guess here's where it became so poignant to me. It's a self-selected group of humans that all came together and essentially were like, we're free, we're going to do whatever we want, we love you, you're accepted. And, of course, the human condition sneaks in, and I'm sure there was judgment here and there, of course. But in general, the entire thing was built upon this principle. And as you live in that principle, You can replicate that in your own existence, your own life, your own experience of yourself and your surroundings. And then you can choose to be around those people that share similar perspectives. And that's similar to those people that I said, I'd experienced, the burners that I'd met prior to ever going. They had a thing. They were self-selected as someone who got it. They got the radical inclusion. They dropped the judgment. They dropped the morality of it all. There was no you're right or that's wrong or I don't agree with that or you shouldn't this or that. It was essentially all comers are welcome. However you be, awesome. So long as you don't violate me in the process. So freedom essentially is your condition. As soon as I exert anything toward you, I've taken away your freedom. And that violates this. So essentially, you won't go because of your fear of others, your fear of being excluded by a group of people who have constrained you. And you could go. Or the equivalent of, in your own life, I'm not saying you have to go to Burning Man and spend a week in the desert having the best party of your life. That's my own opinion, of course. But essentially the call to action here, I really want to just drive this in. Assess your own behaviors in the world and where are you pulling back? Where are you holding back because of the fear of someone else's judgment? Why will you not expose yourself? The thing that is truly you. Perhaps you have a business idea that you want to promote that's just so true to your heart, your passion, your way of being, and you're afraid that other people will say, I don't like it. That's stupid. What is it about your art that you want to express? Your feelings that you want to tell, the things that are deep within you that you are afraid to share with your partner. There's so many aspects of life where you're constrained, you're restrained because of someone else's opinion of you, someone else's thoughts that you're wrong, bad, not good enough. And maybe they don't. Maybe they do. People express judgment all the time. You know who they are. I went through a transition. I'm just going to briefly mention this. I grew up religious, Mormon, whatever. I dropped it. I went through a pretty traumatic, and we'll say traumatic, exit. And I knew that a lot of my family members were judging me because I heard them talk in judgment about others that did the same thing. And so I knew that I wasn't a part of that group. I wasn't radically included in that group. I just got it. I knew it. I accept it. And that's hard. It's hard to be in that situation, I guess, if you want to call it hard. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find my people. I'm going to find the people that will include me for who I am. When I express who I am, what my desires are, what my thoughts are, what my actions are, that are true to me, that I'm living the principles that give me the best experience of myself, I want to surround myself with those people. I'm not going to be afraid of being judged. I'm not going to have some external morality put upon me that constrains me. I'm going to go to Burning Man. I'm going to dance naked in the desert. And I don't care how you feel about it because I'm free. So I'll say this. Drop, if you can, just start small, whatever it takes. Start telling the truth and start being you. And where appropriate, expose yourself to those around you. And I mean that in the most loving way. Like if you have a feeling, you have a thought, you have a way of thinking about the world, tell the people around you, say it. And let the cards fall where they may, or however that saying goes. And if you have any challenge with this where you're like, I want more for myself, I want to be free in this aspect and I just don't know how to do it, reach out to me because I love these conversations and I love to guide and coach people through the freedom component of life. Like if you feel constrained and you don't know how to get out of it, reach out and I'll help you. I really will. All right. That is it. That is the end of the Escape the Drift podcast episode. I went to Burning Man and why you won't. Maybe you will.